Hey. Love your sweater, by the way.
Oh, great. Yay.
I also wear my shirt. Awesome. Nice.
So what I wanted to just start with today, just a little bit of a welcome to everyone, and thank you so much everyone for today. There's a lot of people, so this is amazing. I'm so
There's even a lot to me.
right, yeah, and I'm so happy that we have Kelly with us. Like I said earlier, Kelly deserves a little cheer because amazing work. Thank you so much, Kelly, for being part of today. um, Thank you everyone for coming on. Earlier someone had asked what the topic was, and the topic is going to be on polyamorous relationships and mental health. We understand that for some, polyamory may be new. Maybe they've never heard of it. We will do a little bit of kind of a, I don't want to say of a definition because there's no true definition of polyamory. So varied, right? But we will give a little bit of an explanation as to what that is. And then we will get started with some introductions of who we are. So my name is Valentíne. My pronouns are they, them. And I believe in sign language there is no gender, which is amazing. Amazing sign language.
Awesome.
But my pronouns are they, them. I am an LCSW in Los Angeles. So what that means is that I practice therapy, but I am a social worker by that's what my degree is in social work. And so the work that I do, I work in nonprofit community mental health, but I also have a private practice in which I work with the LGBTQ plus populations, and I specialize within my communities of the trans and non-binary communities, kink and BDSM involved communities, and as well as polyamorous relationships. So that's a little bit of what I do. I also just started a couple of months ago working with therapists and training them how to work with trans and non-binary clients, as well as kink and BDSM involved clients. I'm thinking that it may be a good idea after reading what I wrote, what we read today and talked about earlier, Manu, with the APA guidelines. I'm thinking it might be a good idea to maybe also offer some training on working with relationships.
Yeah, nice.
So Manu, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do. I love your page. It's amazing, educational, informative, great advocacy work.
Thank you very much. So yeah, my name is Manu. My pronouns are she, her. And yeah, I basically run this page more or less full time. And I have a Redbubble shop where I sell merch, like, for example, the shirts we are wearing. That is available on that Redbubble shop. And yeah, that's basically what I do. I'm also interested in other topics like spirituality, for example. And yeah, of course, also mental health, but through spirituality. And yeah, that's basically what I do.
Thanks. And thank you so much again. Thank you so much for being willing to participate and collaborate. This is amazing. And then Kelly, if you'd like to introduce yourself, it sounds like everyone knows you, Kelly. It sounds like you're really well known. But introduce yourself.
Normally interpreters don't introduce themselves, but my name is Kelly. I'm here to interpret and provide access to the deaf community. The deaf community would like to have more access to Instagram Live, and now that's possible with Instagram allowing up to 4 people now. So
yeah. Well, thank you so much for being part today. I know that I'm aware that normally they don't kind of interact really, but I really want to also include you. So if you do have any questions, Kelly, or if you have anything to add, please feel free to also participate. I don't want to exclude anyone. I will say this though, we do have kind of like 4 topics that we're going to cover today. We'll take questions in the bottom. I think somewhere on the bottom there's a little icon. So just submit your questions, and at the end we'll answer a couple of those if it permits all of us to do so. I don't want to keep anyone for too long if they're not able to. I know we all want to have fun Saturdays in this.
And also the live streams will be on your IGTV and on my YouTube channel, so you can watch it later if you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why don't you tell, is your YouTube linked on your account, Manu?
Yes, it is. It is in the link tree.
Okay, great. Yeah, so make sure if you aren't able to check in today or if you can't stay for the whole thing, that's okay. Just come back, view the video on YouTube or with my YouTube channel or on the IGTV in my profile. So when we get started, again, thank you everyone. So
Just give me a sec to let my cat out of the room. Bye bye.
Bye, cat.
So let's go.
So I wanted to start off with, like I said, some people maybe need to polyamorous relationships or polyamory in general. So I want to start off with asking you, how would you, and again, I know it's hard to find, so vague, but how would you explain polyamory and polyamorous relationships to someone who may not know?
So I would just go with the official definition that you can find on Google when you search for polyamory, and it's basically having multiple intimate relationships at the same time with the consent of everybody involved. So that's the basis, but it can look very, very different. Like there are so many ways to have polyamorous relationships, and like so many relationships as there are people who are practicing it, because it looks different for everybody. But yeah, that's the basic definition of it, and yeah, the consent is the most important part.
Yeah, consent is the big difference in a lot of the misconceptions we'll probably talk about in a little bit, is consent. So polyamory, and I agree with your explanation and definition of polyamory. Personally, this is my own personal opinion, I also think of it as infinite love. Like polyamory is the ability to give infinite love. It's the ability to love more than one item, more than one person, just love in abundance, and working through an abundance mindset as opposed to a scarcity mindset of like competing and I have to get the most.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to add that to like my own explanation of polyamory is just
definitely. That's also what the Infinity Heart is all about. For me personally.
I love icon.
Me too.
Great logo. So why don't we also jump into some of those misconceptions that we were talking about? What do you think some of the big ones?
So as we already said, like consent is very, very important. And one of the misconceptions is that it's just cheating, which it isn't, because when there is consent, it isn't cheating. Because cheating involves lying, going behind people's backs, and breaking boundaries that were set in the relationship. That's cheating. And therefore it can also happen that you're cheating in a polyamorous relationship. Although technically it's not possible because polyamory implies the consent, but there are still people who are cheating in polyamorous relationship in the sense of breaking boundaries that were set beforehand. And going behind people's backs and lying about it. But generally that doesn't happen in polyamorous relationship. It's open, discussed about everything, and everybody knows where they're at. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions that are in polyamorous relationships. And it's very, very important to say that it's not.
Yep, exactly. 100%. It's so funny because I think that's probably, I want to say, I don't want to assume, but I want to say that that's like the biggest, most common misconception, because that was like number one on my list when I started getting ready for today, was everybody thinks it's just an excuse or a reason to cheat. Like that's just the misconception. So yeah, that was number one on my list. One of the things that you mentioned right now that really made me think also with the consent piece is that it requires the communication, right? Consent it just includes communication. So I think that
yeah.
But yeah, consent, communication, and that's a big misconception of like whether it's cheating or not. Yeah.
Definitely, yes.
The second one that I put down, and I don't know if you'll agree, Manu, is that it's impossible, or it can't, or it won't work long term.
Okay.
What do you
think?
That's
also like just general the misconception that it won't work. Yeah, like you don't have the guarantee that it will last, but you have the same thing with monogamous relationships as well. You don't have the guarantee that it will last, which it doesn't for many relationships, and therefore it's just with any relationship that there's no guarantee if it lasts or not, as well as friendships. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But also what I've heard is that it will never work because jealousy is a normal thing and is ingrained in our nature, and I disagree with that, because I think jealousy is a learned behavior through our society, and since it's learned, I believe that it can be unlearned and replaced with the opposite, which is for many comparison, like being happy for people with their experiences with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like also in polyamorous relationship, it's not the absence of jealousy. Like many polyamorous people still experience jealousy. And if you experience jealousy, that doesn't mean that you're not suitable for polyamorous relationships. It just means that there are maybe some insecurities that you have to work on for everybody to make it more comfortable and make it easier. So you definitely have to work through your insecurities to make polyamorous relationships work. Whereas in monogamous relationship, you might not have to work on your insecurities as much because there isn't a threat of another person or something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's what you said is exactly true. Like that misconception is true of any friendships, monogamy, family relationships. Like, who knows if it'll be long term? We don't know that. Relationships are so diverse and so complicated. There's no way of knowing what's going to work, what's not going to work, regardless of whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, whether it's monogamous, polyamorous. It's just it. So I'm noticing that it's lagging a bit. I don't know if the video continues. Like, you hear me while I'm talking.
I can hear you now. Yes.
But okay, sorry. Yeah, I guess it's a bad connection. But we'll continue as best as we can. I noticed a couple of questions come in. Just a reminder, if you have questions, drop them in the little question icon below. We'll answer some of those questions at the end if we have enough time and if the connection permits us.
It does. I'm positive that it will.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the big misconceptions that I noted down.
I have another one. It's just about sex.
Oh, yeah.
That's a huge one. I even had that 2 weeks ago with a friend of mine that I had told him about it, like about this page that I'm running. And he was like, yeah, but isn't polyamory just threesomes and stuff? And I was like, no! Like, as with any other conventional relationship, I would say, sex is a part of it. Like, it's a part of that intimacy, but it's not required for that relationship. And there are also many asexual people who are practicing polyamorous relationships. And therefore, like, intimacy is a lot more than just sex. And I had this quote posted a while back that stated that, like, polyamory is about intimacy, and sex can be an aspect of intimacy, but it's not required for intimacy. And I think that quote is really, really good and sums it up very, very good. And yeah. That's just another big misconception that many, many people have about polyamory. That you just want to fuck around or whatever.
This is how, like, my brain is in, like, polyamory. So, like, I didn't even think of that because that's not even such a critical part of polyamory that I didn't even think that was a misconception, because my brain is like steered towards polyamory. Like, I'm already like, I've normalized polyamory in my head and my life, that I completely forgot that some people actually still do believe that it's all about sex. And it doesn't, obviously, if I forgot. But yeah, that is another big misconception. Kind of tying that in with the different community or the different practice of like swinging. I think sometimes
Yeah,
that can also be
they
a little
switch
bit.
it up.
Yeah,
They think
they may
that
use.
swinging is polyamory, which is not. Like they do it like swinging or open relation. Like also they switch it up with open relationships. And open
No.
relationship is that you have one primary partner in which you have like emotional and sexual and romantic intimacy, but then you have sexual encounters with other people. And swinging, I think, is more like playing with other people and partner swaps, but it's also sexual based. And whereas in polyamory, it's about the like actual relationships, building actual relationships long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And to me, I don't. This is again my own personal opinion. To me, I think an open relationship is a form of polyamory, but it is not in and of itself interchangeable with polyamory. Like you cannot use those two labels interchangeably. Like just because you have an open relationship doesn't necessarily mean that it's polyamorous. And just because you're polyamorous doesn't necessarily mean it's an open relationship. Did that make sense?
I know what you mean, but it's a little bit different. Polyamory, swinging, and open relationships are under the umbrella of non-monogamy, like ethical non-monogamy.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, the umbrella term, yes, exactly. Non-monogamy and differing, I don't want to say subsets, but varying relationship structures.
Yeah, definitely.
But great. So those are some of the misconceptions that I noted down.
I have another one.
Yeah.
And it's also that people think that only people who have commitment issues pursue polyamorous relationships, like people who can't commit to a person, to just one person, will pursue polyamorous relationship, which isn't true as well, because I think polyamorous people are so good at commitment that they're doing it with multiple people. I feel like it's like that.
The misconception is that that it's a commitment problem, and that's not
Yeah,
true. It requires more commitment and more.
exactly.
Absolutely right. And some of these and kind of what Manu and I talked a little bit about before starting. Some of these misconceptions are kind of tied into like the next question that we're going to kind of address, because it's an important aspect into the mental health and once we start talking about mental health and polyamory.
Yeah, and the second question is that what assumptions a therapist should avoid about polyamorous relationships. And it's basically, in my what I think is that we just listed the assumptions that the therapist should avoid and be aware about. And yeah.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right when you said, oh, a lot of these are actually tied into the question. Yeah, they are, because that's the goal that we want to spread this knowledge and let people know and spread awareness of like, hey, these are misconceptions. Don't hold on to these. You need to let them go. You need to see things differently. And for myself as a therapist, like one of the things that I don't like, I've heard and I've read a lot of polyamorous people talk about their therapist saying things like, that means there's something wrong in your relationship, or you've got issues, or basically pathologizing polyamorous structure. And
What does pathologizing mean?
pathologizing means labeling it as an illness or sickness. It means where you're trying to make it like a diagnosis of something wrong that needs to be fixed. And I don't agree with that. Like, we should not pathologize different relationship structures. Thank you for asking that question. But I think that's a big assumption to if any therapists are watching today. Definitely, that's the biggest one. If you're going into to it with the mindset of like there's something wrong with this relationship or these people, no, you cannot work with polyamorous. Don't work with them because you are not that, and you are not looking at it from a very human and passionate perspective. You are looking at it from a very medical model, and
Yeah,
I
very
don't.
biased.
Yeah. So I think that's a big one. Is don't go into it with like there's something wrong with this, or I don't understand it, therefore I have to fix it, make it fit into something else. That's not a good, that's
That doesn't make a good therapist.
not at all. And then the other one that I think, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Mario, because I think this might be a little bit of a cross between my opinion as a therapist and my opinion as the person who practices polyamory. I think like hierarchical labels or even labels with like titles of people. I also think that's something that therapists shouldn't assume. Like, don't assume that someone has a hierarchical form of polyamory where there's primary or there's a secondary or etc. I don't think we should make that assumption. I think we should ask and let them tell us. Let people who we're working with, if they're polyamorous, let them tell us what their relationship structure is and what words they use and how they refer to each other. What are your thoughts? Do you think that that's a good idea, that we shouldn't make those assumptions as therapists, that we should just, oh well, that's your primary, or that's your boyfriend or spouse or whatever?
Like for me, it just goes without saying that the client explains their relationship structure and explains like for me, it just goes without saying
Yeah.
that not the therapist assumes anything, and just the client explains, like the patient explains how they have their relationship, and that just would be, when I would be a therapist, I would want my client or patient to explain that to me so I know where they're at. Like that's just obvious to me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you'd make a great therapist.
I'm very much into psychology, but
Yeah, because that's honestly that's a big part of being a therapist, is you have to be able to do that. But the thing is, and this is what makes me really sad, is that a lot of therapists that are not familiar with polyamorous structures, they're still functioning from a monogamous mindset. So they may not they make assumptions. They may make assumptions that it works like a monogamous relationship, that there is a hierarchy, that there are roles and expectations and things like that may or may not be true of a monogamous relationship, but it also has no reflection on a polyamorous relationship. It may not
yeah,
be that way at
definitely.
all. So I know that I also know that like for myself, because I'm non-binary, I never make assumptions about partners' gender identities. So I will always also make a point of asking, what do they use, or what do they, what do they go by? Because I think that's also another important one. You don't want to like be working with a polyamorous, a polycule. I'll call it a group of people that are polyamorous. You don't want to be working with polycule and then say, oh well, your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and maybe that person doesn't identify with that gender. Maybe that's not their label or term that they use in their relationship. So I think that that's probably a big one too for therapists. Like, you should not assume the structure or the gender or
Just
any
don't
of
assume
that, and
anything. Just ask questions.
ask. Always ask. Always go with what you said. Go with what they are telling you, because they're the expert of their own religion. Really.
Yeah. And it also makes them seen and like welcome to explain their relationship structure, and that it's okay to have the structure that they have, and not be like, well, because when a therapist assumes what kind of relationship they have, that makes them uncomfortable, because then they're like, okay, it doesn't fit in the boxes that this therapist has or anything. and just not making any assumptions and asking the patient or client what it is, what does your relationship look like, what pronouns do you identify with, what do you want to call your partners. You can also just say partner. You don't have to say boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse. You can just say partner. It's gender neutral. It doesn't assume anything.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I love the word partner or spouse. Those are my two favorite ones. Those are kind of like my go-tos because they're so neutral. Um, so I definitely agree. I think another, and this might be, I don't know, this may be a little controversial, but I also think an assumption that sometimes people have, and I'm not sure if therapists have this assumption as well, but I have seen just everyday people that I interact with think of polyamory as a kink. And that is something that as a therapist, you should definitely not as a therapist. If you are an ordinary person and you don't know much about polyamory, if that's a misconception you have, okay. But as a therapist, you really shouldn't hold that misconception because it is not a kink.
It's not. Like you can have fantasies about threesomes, but that's not polyamory.
Yeah. And I think the big component there is the difference I think between polyamory and like let's say if you have a kink regarding threesomes or a kink regarding like gangbangs or anything that group
Orgies.
yeah, anything that's group oriented, the kink difference between that and polyamory, there may not be the intimacy or the emotional connection or romantic connection that's involved with polyamory. That's what I
Exactly.
see as the difference between like
Yeah, I personally think in polyamory it's about the romantic aspects. In like the center is the romantic aspect for me, but some people also disagree with that. They also say they're polyamorous when they have only sexual partners, which is fine for me. But I personally view it as like the romantic aspect is the core of polyamory, and then sexual relationships are there as well, of course. But yeah, for me, for polyamory is all about the romantic, emotional intimacy, and of course, for many in relationships, sex is a part as well.
but yeah, this proves that point that you need to act because exactly what you pointed out a difference that that is true. Some people may see it as polyamory while others don't. So we really do need to go with what they add. So I know that um, we're talking about what therapists should avoid as far as working with polyamorous relationships. What do you think you would look for in someone that would let you know that, oh, okay, this person would be good to work with as a therapist?
Well, the opposite of what we just said, that they're inclusive, that they're asking questions, that they're kind, and really make you feel welcome in that space and really feel welcome to talk about your relationship structures, and that you just feel safe in that space of that therapy and with that person. Also, the vibe with the therapist just has to work out because sometimes it just doesn't, although they have a kind intention, but it just sometimes it doesn't click. So that's another thing. But that doesn't necessarily have to do with the qualities of that therapist. It's just a personal thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically just the opposite of what we just said, that they're inclusive, that they know the basics of polyamory and then ask questions about the rest and don't assume anything. And yeah, don't make misconceptions or assumptions that aren't true. And be educated about polyamory and yeah.
Yeah, no, excellent points. Like all around, yeah, that's basically what I would say is a good way of looking at like seeking a therapist is, are they inclusive? Do they use inclusive language with you? Do they go based off of what they know, or are they going off of you? It's really important to always start with in this setting to always start where they're at. And any therapist that's a good therapist is always going to do that. They will always start with where you are as far as emotionally, identity, anything. So I definitely agree with that. That you have to feel that vibe, that vibe that you're feeling. It's what therapists, we call that a therapeutic alliance.
Okay.
And it's a real, it's what makes a therapy relationship really, really helpful and really, really special in its own way. It's that ability to vibe and be able to connect and build that that trust that is really essential for therapy and
Yeah,
work.
definitely.
Um, I think something to look for in therapists also is for myself. This may not be true for everyone, and I wrote an article about identity specific therapeutic relationships. I wrote an article on psychosocial media. And one of the things that I was talking about in that article was whether we should seek out a therapist that identifies in a way that we identify. So, in the context of our conversation, should I seek out a therapist that is also polyamorous or knows a lot about polyamory? Or should I seek out anyone? And in the article, I talked about the benefits and the risks of both sides of doing both, going with identity specific therapy relationships and identity non specific relationships. Um, I personally think that with identity specific relationships for polyamory could be really helpful because not a lot of therapists know about or practice polyamory. So I think that a great therapist, regardless of what their relationship is like, will still be able to work with you.
Yeah.
But I think a safer bet, and I don't want to, again, I'm making generalizations, which I shouldn't. I think a safer bet is to go with someone who is openly stating that either they are polyamorous or they have experience with polyamorous relationships. I
Yeah.
think that's something that someone who is polyamorous and is looking for mental health or a therapist, I think that's something that you should consider is, do I want to go with someone who has no knowledge about it, or do I want to go with someone that does? It's really up to you. It's up to the client's decision. But I personally think that I would want someone that understands my ideologies and the way I feel and the way I think. It makes it easier to build that connection and to work on
Yeah,
the.
definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I would personally want someone who has experience with what I'm experiencing, because that just makes it easier. They know what they're talking about. They have their own experience, and yeah, it just makes it easier as compared to someone who doesn't have any experience with, who might have all the knowledge about it, but it's still different. And I personally wouldn't seek out someone who has no knowledge about polyamory whatsoever, because there are these misconceptions and assumptions, and I I don't want to generalize as well. I think there are amazing therapists out there as well who don't have any knowledge about polyamory, but still can be inclusive about that. But generally, I would want to seek out someone who has at least a lot of knowledge about polyamory.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, to kind of piggyback off of you and that generalization that I'm making, you could be the most amazing therapist in the world and you are phenomenal. But all of us humans, have areas in which we are, we don't have a strength. We do not excel in that area. And that's why there are therapists that work specifically, like myself, that work specifically with certain communities or certain populations. And there are therapists that work specifically with certain disorders and certain issues that people need help with, because we all have our strengths and weaknesses as therapists and people. So I think that that's a really good way of talking about that. We're not trying to generalize that, you know, anything, that we're talking about being able to work on that, able to help us in a way that we need as a consumer of health.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing that you mentioned that made me think about was another thing that people should look for in a therapist that's going to work with polyamorous relationship is whether or not they're focusing on the actual work that you need to do. So, like, for example, the goals that you have for your relationship. If you're coming in seeking mental health, and I'm like fixated and fascinated on just the polyamory aspect, but I'm not paying attention to like what you need from me, that's a bad sign. Like,
Yeah.
get there. Like, it's not about me learning about you. I mean, yes, it is about you, but that should be the focus of my attention. The focus of my attention as a great therapist should be, how am I going to help you? What do you need me for? Will I be here?
Yeah.
So I think that that's also another thing to look at. Like, are they just fixated on learning about polyamory through you? Are you being the educator to them? Are they just using you for information and to learn from you? Or are they actually interested in helping? That's another thing that I think people should really be looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but yeah, obviously.
Yeah, because it happens. I remember there was this one time, I forgot who it was, but I'm not going to name names, but I'm trying to think of from my own personal memory, and I can't remember who it was, but I remember there was a therapist that I had started working with, um, as me as a consumer and them as my therapist. And I remember they were so fixated on like me coming out and my identities, and that's not what I was there for. I was there, and I'm just like, that's not what I'm here for. Like, why are we doing this after 3 sessions? So I think that that's something that I really want to encourage people to just be aware of whenever they seek out a therapist. Are they paying attention to like what you need from them? Or are they just kind of like getting their own learning experience from you?
Mm. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, do you want to go to the fourth question?
Oh yeah. The fourth question, the APA guidelines.
Yeah. Do you want to explain what the APA guidelines are?
And they basically set standards for best practices for therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, workers, basically anyone working within the health field. They're also a big part of the creation of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM, which is basically like the end all be all books of like diagnosing and mental health for America. I think in the European countries it's the ICD or the
I don't know.
I don't really remember what its acronym is, but it's a different coding system. It's basically a coding system for diagnosing and insurance, and it's just like, it's another beast. It's another IG Live.
I mean, I also have to mention, I didn't do it in the introduction. I'm from Germany, like I'm not from the United States, so I haven't ever heard about the APA before. Just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I'm from Los Angeles, and Manu's. But so yeah, so that's probably why when you reached out, and you're like, I don't know what the APA is. I didn't expect you to know what that was. Not only because you're in Germany, but also because it's very specific to like therapists and people who practice mental health. So there was a recent update to the guide for psychologists and therapists, and this update was in regards to mental health work with mental health work with sexual or sexuality minority groups. And in this new update to the guidelines, there was a subsection, guideline number 9, which was about varying or diverse relationship structures, which included non-consensual, non-monogamous relationships.
Yeah, definitely.
And I always want to complain, so I have some criticisms of it, more so than I do. I mean, I want to start off by saying that it's wonderful that they updated it. It's wonderful that they are trying to encourage the mental health field to take a step back and be like, whoa, hold your biases, hold your judgments. We're not doing that. We should not be doing that. You need to really not do that if you work with one that's in any kind of relationship. You need to check your own biases and judgments. So I'm glad that they're doing that. I am glad that it's beginning to be a conversation, but I have a lot of criticisms about it after reading it. So some of the issues that I have with it is that social workers like myself, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. We are not psychologists. we have a background in psychology. We have a background in, we are, we are credentialed and licensed to be working in the mental health field, but we are not psychologists. So this psychologist, the American Psychological Association is primarily geared towards psychologists, which are different than social workers. And I think that social workers, in general, again, another generalization, so kind of a disclaimer. In general, social workers are more person-based and are more based off of what the person has experienced in their life, versus psychology tends to be, not all the time, but it tends to be more pathologizing, meaning, how do I fix this? There's an issue, there's something wrong. That's been the history of the Psychological Association. That's kind of been their history. They're the people who deemed homosexuality an illness and a disorder. Same thing with like gender dysphoria. Back then they used to use a different term, and I'm not going to use it because it's a bad term to use. But they basically held the position of power to label what's a sickness or a disorder. So I'm not a fan of psychology, really. Even though I work in the mental health field, I'm not a fan of the history. So it's aimed at psychologists, and social workers are not psychologists. So I think that that's a distinction that needs to be made, and for people to know, it might be helpful for someone who wants to work with someone who's more person centered as opposed to like disorder or pathologizing. But the most obvious criticism that I have is that I think it was a 22 or 30-page document, something like that, and consensual non-monogamous structures was like maybe 6 or 7 paragraphs. Like it was not a lot of information. It was not a lot there. So that was my biggest thing, is that there needs to be more. There needs to be more research and more literature on on working with consensual non-monogamous relationships. I think it was too small. I think it was too limited. I do like that they are encouraging psychologists to take a different standpoint and to take a different view of it. I just think that there needs to be more of it. And the other issue that is a little, how do I say this? A little bit of a problem is that a lot of these things, like updates to guidelines and like continuing education, it falls on us as therapists. Like we have to seek that out. And other times, fortunately, as therapists get older, we kind of get stuck in our ways of practicing. And so sometimes things like this update, APA guidelines update, sometimes falls through the cracks. So I think that there is a dissemination issue where like they need to find a better way of making sure that people working in mental health get information. So that's another issue that I have, is that had it not been for if it's not for our own sake of learning, if we don't go out there and learn on our own, we may never find out information like this as the kind of
Okay.
So that's something that I would like to see improve, is that there's a more secure way of making sure that people are, especially people working with mental health, that are getting this information. So that's another criticism of the guidelines. But overall, like what the guidelines state, and I'm gonna, sorry everyone, I'm gonna read because I don't have it nice, but I'm just gonna state a couple of the different themes that came up that I thought would summarize what the guidelines to the APA are. And a lot of these are what I and probably Manu already assume to be givens. Like we probably think of like, well, yeah, obvious. But again, but again, this is for people who may not have any experience whatsoever. So to me, these are like what Manu said, duh moments. Like, yeah, we should already be doing that. But so it's basically saying that there are various relationship structures, and that we as people in the mental health field should not be making any assumptions or generalizations the people that we work with and their relationships. Duh.
Duh.
It's also saying that we should focus on relationship work and not necessarily on the structure. In a way, because it looks like it froze. There you go. So it's saying that we should focus on the relationship work and not the actual structure of the relationship, which is what we talked a little bit about earlier. And again, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of, yeah, any good therapist would not focus on the structure. They would focus on what the person wants from the therapy. And then the other thing that I got from reading today is that we check our own biases and our own judgment, which again, duh. So even though a lot of it seems like any good judgment would tell you to do these things, it's hard for me to sit here and read this and think like, oh man, people need to be told this. Like, people really need to learn this. Like, it's not just obvious.
Yeah. Weird to me.
And I know that Manu, if you don't mind, I'm not gonna pressure you to say anything about your own journey if you don't want to. But in regards to like mental health, what would you recommend? Because I don't know the European system, so I'm not sure what mental health is like in Europe. What would you recommend to someone who is polyamorous and may have some mental health issues?
I don't know about the European mental health therapy thing because I personally have never been to therapy or seeked out therapists because I personally, for my conscience, I don't need it. But I have my spiritual practices like shadow work, for example, and that's actually how I got into polyamory, that I got through the spiritual practices, got into the abundance mindset and was like, why only give love to one person? Why can't I give it to as many people as possible, basically? And that's kind of how I got into polyamory. And I didn't know the name, and then I just explained this to a person. They were like, so you're polyamorous. Like, it was the most obvious thing ever. And I was like, what? And then I just got into it. I think it depends on the mental health issues the person is facing in general. A lot of people reach out to me and say to me that they have jealousy or they're experiencing jealousy or they have insecurities. And someone actually reached out to me and said that their partner has like borderline issues or borderline, I don't know what's it called. And I was like, maybe I don't feel specialized or like an expert to talk about this or give you advice when the person has severe mental health issues. Like, I don't feel in the situation to talk about this or give advice on this, so maybe seek out professional help if you don't already. But yeah, generally it would just depend on the mental health issues the person is facing. And I personally think you can do a lot on yourself, like with your own, like through spiritual practices, for example, like I do. But if you feel like you can't go through that alone, you don't have to. To a certain extent, friends can help you, but also there is a limit somewhere when friends don't feel comfortable anymore helping you with your problems, and then it's a good thing to seek out professional help that actually studied stuff like this and can actually help you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. No, thank you so much for sharing what your experience as far as your knowledge of like therapy and what you do for your own growth and your own learning. And yeah, that's the thing, is that there is no right or wrong way of learning and growing. There is none. It's your own journey, and you need to figure out what's going to help you on that journey. So sometimes it is therapy, sometimes it is friends, sometimes it is family, sometimes it's shadow work, like you mentioned. Sometimes it can be anything. It really is. It's so personal, and so it really is up to ourselves and what we think we need and seeking that out. The wonderful thing is that there's always...
Personally, I just want to say that for me personally, I feel like I know myself best. And for example, through meditation and sitting still and listening to my thoughts and stuff like that, I can really get to know myself even better. But that's just me. And there are people out there who don't want to do this esoteric woo-woo stuff. But for me, it works. And it has done wonders in the past 2 years, 2 to 3 years I've been doing this. And but yeah, there are people out there who might need that have such severe mental health issues that need professional help to get through this, because for them it's just too overwhelming to figure it out themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's totally fine as well. As you said, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It depends on the individual and what they need, what they feel like they need. And also, just a general thing about therapy is that there are so many people are like, what, you're seeing a therapist? Like, it's so odd. And like when you have physical issues, you're going to a doctor. So it's completely normal when you're having mental issues that you're going to a therapist. It should be as normal as going to a doctor, because that's basically what you're doing. You're going to a doctor for your brain.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a huge stigma on mental health. And I think that's starting to change in the US. There's a big shift lately. And there's a lot of destigmatization that's going on. We're trying to break that stigma because it's so important. Like, it's exactly like what you said. If you're going to the doctor for certain physical or medical needs, it only makes sense that you would go to a therapist or a mental health professional for emotional or mental or any kind of issue that comes up that's not physical can also be addressed with those things. But I agree with, like, meditation and spirituality. Meditation is such a great way to learn about yourself, on yourself, if you're able to. But I'll admit that the times that I've tried meditation, I'm not always very successful at it. Like, there are times, like, when I'm in the right headspace and I'm not as severely anxious or severely depressed, I can do it and it works and it helps. But there are times in my life where I cannot. I just can't. I require a different kind of tool. And that's the beauty about health, is that you don't necessarily have to go if you don't need it. But if you do, it's there. And there's always going to be someone there that will be able to help.
Yeah. I also have my issues with meditation every now and then. Like, I just can't go in. But yeah.
So before we kind of wrap up, because I want to be mindful of people's time, you got a couple of questions in the bottom. Let's see. Oh yeah. How do you talk about your poly relationship with your parent? That's the scary part. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is a big one. So I'm going to be honest with everybody because I believe in honesty. I don't share. My parents and I don't have that kind of relationship. So my private life is my private life. I don't think I'd be able to, as far as personally, I wouldn't be able to give any any ideas. As a therapist, I could definitely talk about it, but I want to hear from you, Manu, if you have any thoughts on that question.
I'm on the same page as you. I haven't come out to my parents about this. But yeah, I don't know, maybe they know I live with them, they know about these live streams, they know what I'm talking about, but I don't know. But generally I'm on the same page with you. It's my personal life. It doesn't have to bother them. It's none of their business, basically. But yeah, I don't have that relationship with them either to freely talk about such things, because I'm experiencing them talking it down or asking weird questions about it. And that just makes me uncomfortable, and therefore I just don't talk about it to kind of protect myself in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think that someone, oh, hi, Real Poly Life Official.
Hey, Nicole.
They just mentioned that coming out is a choice, right? And that's absolutely true. Any kind of coming out or allowing, I'm going to reframe it. And it's not so much coming out as allowing people into your life in a more intimate way. And we don't allow just anyone in. So it's up to you who you allow into that aspect of your life. So if you want to share about sexuality, that's, if you want to share about your gender identity, that's your choice. If you want to share about your Saturday, that's your choice. So if you want to share about your polyamorous pressures, that's also your choice. If you want to share that you are a believer of consensual non-monogamy, you have a right to decide whether or not you're going to talk about it. So
yeah, definitely, I agree with that.
yeah. So I think that that's a wonderful thing to always be mindful of, is that you don't have to tell anyone anything that you don't want to. If you don't feel comfortable doing so, that's okay. But if you do want to allow someone into your life in that intimate way, it can be scary. I understand. Trust me, I've come out more times than I can count. It's scary because it's you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position of rejection and abandonment, and it leaves you open for hurt. And I know that that's scary. But it's your choice whether or not you want to do it. And if you do want to do it, definitely seek out support if you need help doing that, whether it's with friends, family that already know, friends and family that already know, or spirituality, if you have a spiritual mentor or a guru, or if you want to do some meditation, or if you want to seek out mental health. Do what you need to do that's going to give you the support. I'll wait a little because I think okay, I think but yeah, do what you need to do to get the support that you need.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to add, like, for example, when I'm with my friends, I'm open to them.
Sorry.
Like, we are having very open discussions about sex and relationships. Like, I'm very open with most of my friends. And I didn't officially came out to them in the sense of I went to them and said, hey, I'm polyamorous. As for basically anything, when the situation comes up, I will mention it, but I won't start the conversation myself, because then I'm kind of putting myself in the spotlight and be like the center of attention or anything. But when, for example, relationships come up, or I don't know, the conversation is about fandom, and is a relationship structure in which one person has to choose two, and I'm like, hey, why can't she have both?
Mm-hmm.
And then start the conversation from there. That's what I'm most comfortable with, rather than starting the conversation for myself and be like, hey, I'm polyamorous, let's talk about it or whatever. Just like naturally and organically letting the conversation happen.
Yeah. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. And thank you to Manu and Kelly for being amazing collaborators today. This was beautiful. I hope we get a chance to do some more of this. If you do have any questions, please submit them to either myself or Manu. My name is up there, and then in the description of the video, I will add Manu's profile page on Instagram, and through Instagram you can find additional things that Manu has, such as their Redbubble, where you can get amazing, cool shirts like this. And then I will also tag Kelly to anyone that may want to